Ladies and gentlemen, understanding attachment is the first and most crucial step in learning how to emotionally detach from someone. At its core, attachment is an emotional bond we form with another person, often characterized by the need for emotional support, affection, and validation. We all experience attachment in various forms, whether to family members, friends, or romantic partners. These attachments are natural and, to some degree, essential for our social and emotional well-being. However, what often goes unnoticed is the depth to which these attachments influence our decisions, actions, and perceptions of ourselves. Attachment is often rooted in our early experiences. From a psychological standpoint, our first experiences with caregivers, whether positive or negative, lay the foundation for how we approach relationships later in life. If we were nurtured and supported in a way that fostered security and trust, we are more likely to form healthy, balanced attachments in adulthood. On the other hand, if we experienced neglect or instability, we might form attachments that are overly dependent or emotionally overwhelming. The nature of attachment can become problematic when it evolves from a healthy bond to a form of emotional dependency. Dependency occurs when our sense of self, worth, and emotional well-being becomes too closely tied to the approval, attention, or presence of the other person. At this point, attachment moves beyond mere emotional connection. It becomes a psychological necessity. This is often where problems arise. When we attach too strongly to someone, we may start seeking their validation to feel good about ourselves. This creates a situation where our emotions, self-esteem, and well-being are no longer under our own control, but are instead dictated by the other person. Attachment is often perpetuated by a deep fear of loss. The thought of losing someone we are attached to can evoke feelings of insecurity, anxiety, and even fear of abandonment. This fear is so powerful that it can cloud our judgment, leading us to stay in unhealthy relationships, tolerate mistreatment, or deny our own needs in favor of keeping the attachment intact. The intensity of this fear can make it difficult to see the relationship clearly, often leading to the rationalization of unhealthy patterns or behaviors. When we are emotionally dependent on someone, it is easy to overlook red flags, ignore our own discomfort, or feel incapable of standing up for ourselves. Another aspect of attachment to consider is the role that attachment styles play in our emotional lives. Attachment theory, developed by psychologist John Bowlby, identifies several attachment styles that influence how we relate to others. These include secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized attachment styles. Each style comes with its own set of behaviors, expectations, and fears within relationships. For example, people with an anxious attachment style often fear abandonment and may cling to their partners, seeking constant reassurance. Those with avoidant attachment tend to distance themselves emotionally from others, avoiding deep emotional connections for fear of being hurt. Understanding your own attachment style is crucial when attempting to emotionally detach, as it helps you recognize the underlying forces driving your need for attachment. The problem with these emotional bonds, particularly when they become unhealthy, is that they can be so all-consuming that they prevent us from functioning at our best. They may limit our capacity for personal growth, make us overly reliant on the approval of others, or cause us to neglect our own needs and desires. In an unhealthy attachment, the relationship becomes an anchor that weighs us down rather than a source of mutual support and growth. We may find ourselves compromising our values, losing touch with our individuality, or feeling trapped in a cycle of dependence. This can create a situation where we feel emotionally drained, disconnected from our true selves, and unable to make decisions that are in our best interest. Moreover, attachment can also foster a distorted sense of self. When we attach too strongly to someone, we may begin to define ourselves in relation to that person. For instance, we might think, I am only happy when they are around, or I am not worthy unless they love me. This kind of thinking diminishes our autonomy and self-worth. Our identity becomes too entangled with that of the other person, making it difficult to distinguish where our own thoughts, feelings, and desires end and where theirs begin. In this way, emotional attachment, when taken to an extreme, can lead to a loss of self-identity. At the heart of this issue is the imbalance that forms between our own needs and the other person's influence over us. This imbalance can create a codependent relationship dynamic where both parties are emotionally enmeshed, unable to function fully as individuals. This is not healthy for either person involved, as it fosters dependency rather than mutual respect, independence, and growth. To begin emotionally detaching, it is important to first acknowledge the attachment itself. The process of detaching requires self-awareness and a willingness to challenge the beliefs and patterns that have been formed through that attachment. It involves recognizing that your self, worth, and emotional health should not be dictated by someone else's approval or presence. Emotional detachment isn't about rejecting the other person. It is about creating space for yourself to grow, heal, and rediscover who you are without the constant influence of the attachment. The first step in detaching is to become aware of the attachment's grip on your emotions and actions. Recognizing when you are acting out of dependency or fear of loss is crucial. Once you identify this, you can begin to shift your focus back to yourself. This may involve rediscovering your passions, strengthening your own sense of identity, and working to cultivate a healthy sense of self-worth independent of the attachment. Ultimately, understanding attachment is the foundation of emotional detachment. It helps you see how deeply emotional bonds can influence your thoughts, actions, and relationships. By gaining awareness of how attachment operates, you can begin to free yourself from unhealthy dependencies and start cultivating healthier, more balanced relationships, ones that allow you to thrive as an individual while still connecting with others in a meaningful way. The concept of personal growth plays a pivotal role when it comes to emotionally detaching from someone. It is not just about distancing yourself or cutting someone off. Rather, it involves a deeper commitment to cultivating your own development, well-being, and emotional resilience. Understanding that emotional detachment is often intertwined with your own growth process is essential for achieving true independence and clarity in relationships. Personal growth, in its simplest form, is the ongoing development of your emotional, mental, and physical state. It is the continuous process of bettering yourself through self-reflection, learning, and improving your ability to navigate life's challenges. When we talk about emotional detachment in the context of personal growth, we are referring to the act of stepping back from a relationship or attachment that no longer supports your development, allowing yourself the space to focus on your own needs, goals, and emotional health. One of the first aspects to understand about personal growth is that it is fundamentally about recognizing and understanding your own value and worth. Often, emotional attachment to another person arises from a perceived lack of self-worth or from a desire to be validated. When we tie our sense of self-esteem and emotional well-being to someone else, we lose sight of who we are as individuals. Personal growth teaches us to recognize that our worth is intrinsic. It's not based on someone else's approval, affection, or behavior. When you are emotionally attached to someone, your own emotional health can become dependent on how they treat you. If they are kind, loving, and supportive, you may feel content and validated. However, when they are distant, critical, or unavailable, your sense of self-worth may fluctuate, leading to emotional turmoil and confusion. Personal growth is about learning to decouple your emotional state from someone else's behavior. It is about learning to stand firm in your own sense of value, regardless of external circumstances. In the process of personal growth, you begin to develop the skills necessary for emotional self-regulation. This includes understanding and managing your emotions rather than being governed by them. Emotional detachment doesn't mean suppressing emotions. It means learning how to process emotions in a healthy way. When you can manage your emotions independently, you are less likely to become overwhelmed by the emotional ups and downs that often accompany a close attachment. You begin to take responsibility for your emotional state rather than allowing someone else's actions to dictate how you feel. A key aspect of personal growth is self-awareness. To emotionally detach, you must first recognize the patterns and dynamics within the relationship that contribute to your emotional dependency. This involves reflecting on the ways in which the attachment affects you, whether it be by stifling your personal goals, affecting your mental health, or keeping you stuck in unhealthy behavior patterns. Being self-aware means acknowledging your own role in the attachment, understanding how you contribute to the emotional dynamics of the relationship, and recognizing the areas where you need to take responsibility for your emotional state. This self-awareness allows you to make the necessary changes to promote your own well-being and emotional independence. Personal growth also requires an element of courage. It's easy to stay within familiar boundaries, even if they are unhealthy, because they feel safe. When you are emotionally attached to someone, even if the relationship is not beneficial to your growth, it can be difficult to let go of the comfort and security that attachment provides. Personal growth challenges you to step outside of your comfort zone, to confront the fear of change, and to embrace the uncertainty that comes with emotional detachment. It requires you to believe that you are capable of thriving independently, and that the growth you will experience from detaching will ultimately be more fulfilling than staying in a limiting or toxic relationship. The process of personal growth also involves gaining clarity about your values, goals, and purpose in life. When you are too emotionally attached to someone, it can be easy to lose sight of your own dreams and aspirations, particularly if you are constantly focused on fulfilling the needs or desires of the other person. Personal growth encourages you to reconnect with your own ambitions and desires. It involves a deep understanding of what you want out of life and the relationships you have. Emotional detachment, in this sense, is not about rejecting people, but about recognizing that in order to pursue your own goals, you may need to create space and focus on your personal journey. Emotional detachment allows you to make decisions based on your own needs and growth, rather than out of fear, guilt, or obligation. When you grow emotionally, you learn to make choices that serve your well-being, even when they are difficult. This process might involve making decisions that are not popular or comfortable, such as ending a relationship or taking a step back from a person you care about. It's not about abandoning others. It's about choosing to put yourself first in a way that is healthy, rational, and aligned with your personal values. The development of emotional resilience is another fundamental component of personal growth that supports emotional detachment. Resilience refers to your ability to adapt to adversity and recover from challenges. As you grow emotionally, you develop the strength to handle life's difficulties without relying on others to provide comfort or solutions. This resilience allows you to weather emotional storms without feeling the need to cling to someone for support. It means that even in difficult situations, you trust your ability to cope and move forward on your own terms. Ultimately, personal growth is about becoming whole and complete as an individual. Emotional detachment becomes a natural byproduct of this growth because you realize that you do not need anyone to complete you. You are already enough on your own. Detaching emotionally from someone is not about rejecting them. It is about acknowledging that your growth requires space, independence, and the ability to nurture your own well-being without relying on someone else's approval. It is a journey toward becoming the best version of yourself, one that is self-sufficient, self-aware, and emotionally empowered. By prioritizing your personal growth, you equip yourself with the tools necessary to create healthier, more balanced relationships in the future, where both individuals can thrive independently and together. Setting healthy boundaries is an essential component in the process of emotional detachment, as it empowers individuals to protect their mental, emotional, and physical well-being. Boundaries are not just limitations, they are guidelines that reflect our values, needs, and self-respect. In relationships, whether romantic, familial, or platonic, boundaries help us maintain a sense of autonomy and prevent others from overstepping or manipulating our emotional space. Without healthy boundaries, we risk losing ourselves in relationships, often sacrificing our needs, desires, and even our sense of self. To understand the importance of boundaries, it's helpful to first recognize what they truly represent. Boundaries are not meant to be walls that keep people out, but rather they are safeguards that preserve our individuality and protect us from emotional harm. In relationships, boundaries are the lines we draw that determine where we end and others begin. They help us establish limits on what we are willing to accept or tolerate from others. For example, if you are in a relationship where someone constantly disrespects your time or ignores your emotional needs, setting a boundary might involve saying, "I can no longer tolerate being treated this way." This not only sets a limit, but also serves as a clear statement about how you deserve to be treated. When you lack boundaries, it becomes easy to get entangled in another person's emotional world. Without the clarity that boundaries provide, you may find yourself constantly responding to the needs and demands of others at the expense of your own. This leads to emotional burnout, confusion, and a loss of personal identity. Emotional detachment, in part, is about creating the space necessary to reassert your boundaries. It requires you to recognize when a relationship or attachment has crossed into a space that is detrimental to your well-being. By setting clear boundaries, you establish a framework that allows you to detach without guilt or fear of rejection. It is important to note that setting boundaries is not a selfish act. It is an act of self-care and self-respect. One of the most common barriers to setting healthy boundaries is the fear of conflict or disappointing others. Many people struggle with setting limits because they are afraid of how others will react. This fear often stems from a desire to be liked or accepted. However, it is crucial to recognize that failing to set boundaries often leads to greater emotional harm in the long run, as it compromises your well-being. While it may be uncomfortable initially to assert your needs, the short-term discomfort is far outweighed by the long-term benefits of maintaining your mental health and emotional autonomy. Setting boundaries means learning how to communicate assertively, without aggression or passivity, and standing firm in your decisions. This involves being clear and direct about what you will and will not accept in relationships. Setting boundaries is not just about saying no to others, it is also about saying yes to yourself. When you set boundaries, you are acknowledging your own needs, desires, and emotional limits. You are prioritizing your well-being and taking control of your emotional space. By asserting your boundaries, you send a clear message to others that your needs are valid and deserve to be respected. This is especially important when you are emotionally attached to someone. In situations where emotional detachment is necessary, boundaries allow you to create space between yourself and the attachment. This space helps you to recalibrate and focus on your own needs rather than getting lost in the emotional needs of the other person. A critical aspect of setting boundaries is understanding that they are fluid, not rigid. Boundaries should be flexible enough to adapt to different relationships and circumstances. For instance, you may have one set of boundaries with a romantic partner and another set with a close friend or family member. Understanding where and how to adjust your boundaries based on the dynamics of each relationship is key to maintaining emotional health. Moreover, boundaries can evolve over time. As you grow and change as an individual, your boundaries may shift to reflect new insights about yourself and your needs. This adaptability is essential for sustaining balanced, healthy relationships. Another vital consideration when setting boundaries is the need for consistency. Boundaries are most effective when they are maintained consistently. If you allow someone to repeatedly cross a boundary without consequence, you are sending the message that it is acceptable for them to do so. This undermines your own sense of self-respect and allows others to control or manipulate your emotional space. Consistency in boundary setting is important not only for your own well-being, but also for fostering respect and understanding in your relationships. When others recognize that you will not tolerate certain behaviors, they are more likely to adjust their actions accordingly. Setting boundaries also requires self-awareness and self-reflection. It is essential to know your own limits, values, and emotional needs before you can effectively communicate them to others. For example, if you have difficulty handling conflict, you may need to set a boundary around how disagreements are handled in your relationships. You might say, "I need to take some time to calm down before we discuss this," in order to protect your emotional peace. Similarly, if you are in a relationship where you feel emotionally drained, you may need to set a boundary around the amount of time and energy you invest in that relationship. This could involve limiting the amount of contact or making it clear that you need time for yourself to recharge. Setting boundaries is also an essential skill in maintaining emotional independence. When you allow someone to constantly infringe upon your emotional space, you give them power over your emotional state. This can lead to an unhealthy dependence, where your emotional well-being becomes tied to their actions, words, or availability. By setting boundaries, you take back control of your emotional life, ensuring that you do not rely on others for validation or happiness. This autonomy allows you to emotionally detach in a way that is empowering rather than destructive. In conclusion, setting healthy boundaries is an essential part of emotional detachment. It is the process of clearly defining your emotional space, communicating your needs, and protecting your mental and emotional well-being. While it may be difficult at first, particularly if you are accustomed to putting others' needs first, setting boundaries is ultimately an act of self-respect and self-care. By learning to set and enforce boundaries, you create the conditions for healthier relationships and greater emotional freedom, allowing you to detach from unhealthy attachments without guilt or fear of rejection. Boundaries are the foundation of emotional independence, and they are crucial for preserving your sense of self as you navigate life's challenges.